Have you ever given something away, expecting absolutely nothing in return, only to find out it changed everything? This is the story of a quiet act, a single moment of kindness, and how it unknowingly rewrote the course of two very different lives. But not in the way you might expect. Before we begin, if you believe in stories that move the heart, stir the soul, and remind us of the quiet power of human goodness, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep telling the stories that matter most. Now, let's begin. With a man, a little girl, and a night that would change everything. Single dad donated blood to a stranger. Next morning, her assistant said she owns this hospital. The rain had a way of turning Los Angeles into something quieter, more honest. It washed away the pretense, the polish, and the smog, and left the city bare. Daniel Hart tightened his grip on the steering wheel of his old van as the wipers slapped back and forth in steady, panicked rhythm. In the passenger seat, his 6-year-old daughter Lila hummed a lullaby, her feet swinging above the floor mat. "Almost home, sweetheart," he said, though he wasn't sure that was true. He just finished a grueling 14-hour shift repairing HVAC units in a broken-down office complex near the airport. The job had barely covered rent, and the van was making a new noise, something between a rattle and a whimper. Still, Daniel knew that what they had was enough, or at least it had to be. As they passed the glowing red sign in front of Westview Medical Center, Lila stopped humming. "Daddy," she whispered, "look." Daniel turned his eyes briefly to the sign. A flashing message scrolled across the screen in bold red letters. "Emergency need O-negative blood. Life-threatening. No match found." He stared at it a second too long. The wipers smeared the rain, making the letters ghost-like across the windshield. Daniel's breath caught. O-negative. Universal donor. His type. He pulled into the hospital's driveway without a word. "Is someone hurt?" Lila asked, her voice small. "Yeah," he said, gently putting the van in park. "And I might be able to help." The children's waiting room was quiet at this hour, filled with stuffed animals and the soft lull of cartoons. Lila curled up on a beanbag chair with her backpack, a peanut butter sandwich, and her sketch pad. Daniel knelt beside her. "I won't be long," he said. "If you need anything, the lady at the desk will be here." "Are you giving them your blood?" she asked. He smiled. "Just a little." "I've got more than enough." She nodded seriously, as if her small heart already understood what sacrifice looked like. Inside, a nurse rushed him through. "You're a registered emergency donor?" she asked, scanning his ID. "Yeah," Daniel replied. "O-negative. Been on the list for 4 years. Since Ellie." The nurse's hands were quick, sterile, efficient. The recipient's crashing. "It's a trauma case. Young woman, mid-40s. Multiple internal injuries. No matches in the bank, no family reached yet." "I don't need details," Daniel said, already rolling up his sleeve. "Let's just get it done." He leaned back in the chair, and as the blood began to flow from his arm into the bag, he stared at the ceiling tiles and tried not to think of hospital rooms that smelled like death. He tried not to see Ellie on that stretcher, her lips pale, her hand growing colder in his. He tried and failed. By the time the nurse returned, he was lightheaded but calm. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You may have just saved her life." He nodded, his mouth too dry to speak. "Would you like to leave a name?" she asked. "In case the family—" "No," he said, buttoning up his flannel shirt. "No name. Just, I hope she pulls through." He scrawled a quick note on a torn sheet of invoice paper from his van. "No need to thank me. I just wanted her to live." He handed it to the nurse and then made his way back to the children's room. Lila was asleep, her head tilted back, her drawing still in her lap. A crayon heart glowed red in the middle of the paper. Daniel lifted her gently, holding her against his chest. Her small arms wrapped around his neck. "You saved someone," she mumbled into his collar. "I hope so," he whispered back. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city felt cleaner. He didn't know that somewhere a surgical team was finishing a procedure on a woman who would wake in 12 hours with a second chance at life and a silent stranger's blood in her veins. He didn't know her name, and he never expected to. But 2 miles away in the VIP recovery suite of Westview Medical Center, a monitor beeped steadily beside a pale, unconscious woman with a long scar on her abdomen and fading bruises along her collarbone. Her name was Sophia Langford, and her assistant, Rachel, sat beside her holding a file that had just been handed to her by the night nurse. Anonymous donor Rachel read aloud. O negative, male, early 30s, left a note. She unfolded the scrap of paper, her brows knitting. Then she looked at her employer, the woman who owned not just this hospital but 3 others like it, and whispered, "You're alive," because of someone who didn't want to be known. Outside the hospital, the van sputtered down the street. Daniel didn't look back. He didn't see the security footage that would be saved. Didn't hear the conversations that would happen tomorrow. He was just a father driving home with his daughter in the back seat, tired and grateful that for once he could give something, anything that might make a difference. He had no idea the woman he'd just saved owned the hospital he'd bled in, and he had no idea she'd soon come looking for him. The morning light seeped through the crooked blinds of Daniel's 1-bedroom apartment, painting stripes across the hardwood floor where Lila sat cross-legged coloring a sun with a smiling face. Daniel stood by the stove, flipping pancakes that were more burnt than golden. His body ached from the long shift, and the blood donation had left him slightly dizzy, but there was something quiet and full in his chest, like he had placed a stone back into a missing part of himself. "Can I have 2 sons today?" Lila asked without looking up. He blinked, smiling. "Sure. Why not one for you? One for the lady you helped." Daniel paused. The spatula hovered in the air for a beat longer than it should have. "That's kind of beautiful bug." She shrugged in that effortless way children do when they say something profound and don't realize it. At the same hour, 3 floors above the west wing of Westview Medical Center, Sophia Langford woke for the first time since the accident. The light was gentle, the beeping of the monitors steady. The quiet hum of sterilized air filled the room, familiar, almost too familiar. She knew she was alive before her eyes fully opened, and she hated that she didn't know why. Rachel was there, perched at the edge of a chair in her business casual best, but the creases under her eyes betrayed a sleepless night. "Sophia," she whispered when she saw movement. "You're awake." Sophia tried to sit up and failed. Her body groaned like an old house settling in a storm. "You lost a lot of blood," Rachel continued gently. "It was bad. There was internal damage. You needed emergency surgery." Sophia's throat was dry. "What happened?" "Your car was clipped by a delivery truck. You swerved to avoid a kid in the crosswalk. You saved his life." A beat. "But..." Rachel hesitated, her voice shifting. "There was no blood match for you on record. You're O negative. So rare." Sophia blinked slowly. "How?" "A man came in just after midnight. Gave a direct donation. Wouldn't leave his name. Just a note." She handed Sophia the scrap creased and stained at the corners. "No need to thank me. I just wanted her to live." Sophia stared at the handwriting. Masculine, plain, unassuming. No flourish, no expectation. How did he know? She began, but stopped. He hadn't known. That was the point. Rachel cleared her throat. Security caught him on camera, but he never approached staff after. Left in an old van with a little girl. A little girl. Rachel nodded. She must have been waiting during the donation. "We're trying to trace him through the donor registry, but so far, nothing." Sophia closed her eyes again. A warmth pressed against her chest, not the ache of surgery, but something less familiar. She had spent her adult life building things. Clinics, charities, hospitals. She'd given grants, signed checks, launched campaigns. But every time someone was saved, her name was printed in bold font across brochures, thanked on plaques, quoted at galas. She had never been helped without it being a transaction. A trade. Even her most private moments had never truly belonged to her. But now, here was a man who had asked for nothing, wanted no recognition, and simply gave. And it unsettled her more than death ever could. That afternoon, Daniel fixed a leaking heater in a neighborhood church. The elderly pastor gave him coffee and a few dollars extra, even though Daniel hadn't asked. "God bless men like you," the man said. Daniel smiled politely, not feeling holy in the slightest. On the way home, he stopped by a grocery store, picked up cereal and peanut butter, then drove past Westview Medical Center again. For a moment, he considered stopping. Just to ask, just to see if she'd made it. But something in him held back a mixture of humility and fear. What if she didn't? What if his blood hadn't been enough? No, that wasn't his place. He had done what he could. The rest was not his story to write. In her private recovery room, Sophia stared out the window at the city she used to command. She asked Rachel to tell her everything, how the man had walked in soaked from the rain, carrying nothing but a wallet and a child's backpack. How he didn't ask who the patient was. How he left silently. No press, no camera, Sophia whispered. No agenda. Rachel hesitated. "It's unusual." "No," Sophia said quietly. "It's honest." There was a knock on the door. A nurse entered with a folded piece of paper in a plastic evidence sleeve. "His note," she said. "We preserved the original in case of legal questions." Sophia traced the words again, her fingers trembling slightly. She had spent her whole life controlling outcomes, negotiating, calculating risk, ensuring loyalty. But this man, this nobody, had reminded her of something she'd forgotten, that true kindness doesn't negotiate. It just gives. And suddenly she wanted to meet him more than she'd ever wanted to meet any senator, donor, or CEO. Back in the apartment, Lila clutched her second drawing, another son, this one with a bandage and a smiling face, and taped it to the fridge. Daniel leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, exhaustion heavy on his back, but peace forming in the corners of his heart. "Did you give the lady your strong blood?" she asked. He nodded. "Yeah, I think so." "Then she'll be okay," Lila said with a certainty that only children and miracles possess. He hoped she was right. What he didn't know was that the woman he'd saved had already started searching for him, not out of obligation, but from something deeper. Something like wonder. Something like hope rediscovered. The polished floors of Westview Medical Center reflected every fluorescent light overhead as Rachel Lang stepped briskly toward the executive wing, a tablet clutched in one hand and a sealed envelope in the other. Though she was Sophia Langford's executive assistant, a title that undersold her actual role, Rachel had never seen her boss quite like this. Sophia wasn't in one of her corner offices, nor at the recovery suite. She stood at the observation glass of pediatric ICU. Her figure tall, motionless, dressed not in her usual tailored pantsuit, but in a cotton robe over a hospital gown. The sharpness in her jaw remained, but her eyes, always composed and cool, were softer now. Watching a boy with a cast on one arm make paper airplanes with a nurse. "He's the kid," Sophia said without turning. "The one I swerved for." Rachel paused. "You didn't know that at the time." Sophia nodded slowly. "I didn't need to." Silence hung between them, heavy with meaning. Then Sophia spoke again. "Did you find him?" "Not yet," Rachel said reluctantly. "We've narrowed it down. Based on the blood bank's emergency donor list and time logs, only one match fits Daniel Hart. No phone, no address listed, just a work contact from a maintenance company downtown." "Maintenance?" Sophia asked, eyebrows lifting. "HVAC technician. 35, widowed, single father." Sophia turned from the glass at last. That's all Rachel offered the sealed envelope. And a sketch. The little girl left it in the children's waiting room. A nurse kept it. Sophia opened it. Inside was a crayon drawing a stick figure man, a stick figure girl holding his hand, and a bright red heart between them. At the bottom, in shaky letters, read, "My dad has strong blood." Sophia stared at it longer than she intended. It wasn't the art that moved her. It was the humility in it, the utter simplicity of their world. No one had drawn a hospital, or a doctor, or her, just a father and a daughter, and a heart. "He didn't even ask who I was," she murmured. "No." Rachel said gently, "He didn't care." Sophia felt a strange pressure rise in her chest. Not guilt exactly, something more foreign. Something she hadn't felt since she was a little girl watching her mother wash strangers' clothes at a church shelter. Admiration. Across the city, Daniel crouched beneath a groaning air conditioner on the rooftop of an aging apartment building. The spring sun beat down mercilessly and his shirt clung to his back with sweat. He liked jobs like this. Simple quiet without paperwork or people asking him what he used to do or why he walked with that tired bend in his shoulders. Lila was at school, and the world for a few hours didn't feel like it was pressing against him from all sides. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the way the nurse had looked at him when he handed over the note. Maybe it was the way he hadn't stopped thinking about the woman a stranger and wondering if she was okay. He didn't need to know her name, but he wanted to believe she was still breathing, that the sacrifice hadn't been too late this time. That evening, as Daniel sat on the floor with Lila, both of them cross-legged, building a spaceship out of cereal boxes and glue, there was a knock at the door. He froze. No one ever knocked. Not unless it was trouble. Lila looked up. "Are we expecting someone?" "No," he said, quietly rising. He opened the door, halfway ready to apologize or defend, but stopped short when he saw her. A woman in her early 40s stood there, tall, graceful, her auburn hair pulled back in a low, casual twist. She wore no makeup, only a faint scar tracing the left side of her collarbone. Behind her stood Rachel, ever composed, and Sophia held a folded drawing in her hand. Daniel blinked. Can I help you?" She held up the drawing, Lila's son, beaming. "My name is Sophia Langford," she said softly. "You gave me your blood." Silence. Lila peeked from behind Daniel's legs. Her eyes lit up. "You're the lady." Sophia smiled, unexpectedly warm. "Yes, and you're the artist." Lila beamed. "You're okay now. I am," Sophia said, her voice catching slightly. "Thanks to your dad." Daniel stood frozen, words caught in his throat. He didn't expect this, didn't want attention. But here she was, not as a CEO, not as a symbol, just a woman who had nearly died and had lived because of him. "I didn't do it for recognition," he said, his voice low. "I know," Sophia said. "That's why I'm here." She handed him an envelope not thick with checks or contracts, but a single note inside. "Thank you for reminding me what kindness without condition looks like." Daniel read it slowly, then folded it again. "Would you like to come in?" he asked, hesitating. "I'd like that," she said. And as she stepped inside that modest, lived-in apartment, Sophia felt something shift, as if she just crossed the threshold into a version of life she had long forgotten existed, where nothing needed to be bought, where hearts could meet without resume, where kindness could live without transaction, and perhaps where healing truly began. The apartment wasn't what Sophia had imagined. It was small, lived in, and warm, the kind of warm that came not from central heating, but from fingerprints on walls, crayon sketches taped to the fridge, and the faint smell of cinnamon oatmeal lingering in the air. The couch had a sag on the left side, and the carpet by the door curled at the edge, but it felt alive. "Sorry about the mess," Daniel said, stepping aside to let her and Rachel in. "We weren't expecting company." Sophia shook her head gently. "It's a home. That's what matters." Lila took Sophia's hand without hesitation, as though they were already old friends. "Do you want to see the spaceship we're building?" Sophia blinked, taken aback by the child's sudden openness and oddly grateful for it. "I would love to." She followed the little girl to the far side of the room, where cardboard boxes, bottle caps, and globs of glue made up a lopsided spacecraft on a cookie sheet. Lila explained every part. This is the engine room. This part is where the astronaut sleeps, and this glittery sticker, that's the solar panel. Daniel watched from a few feet away, arms crossed loosely. His expression wasn't guarded, just measured, like a man who'd learned not to get his hopes up too quickly. Sophia turned to him after Lila scampered off to find a flashlight to install in the ship's control panel. "I didn't come to disrupt your life," she said quietly. "I just needed to see the man who gave me mine." Daniel nodded once. Most people would have sent flowers. She smiled. "I considered it, but it felt too distant." "I'm guessing distant is your default. It wasn't meant to sting, but it landed." Sophia didn't flinch. "You're not wrong," she said. "I've spent most of my adult life building things. Hospitals, trusts, programs, but somehow it took nearly dying to realize I'd forgotten how to look someone in the eye and say, 'Thank you.'" He studied her for a beat. "Why me?" "You didn't ask for anything," she said. "Not even my name. That kind of generosity is rare, and I needed to remember it existed." Rachel, standing quietly near the door, finally spoke. "We're not here to complicate anything. This isn't PR or business. Sophia just wanted to be human about it." Daniel gave a short breath that almost passed for a laugh. "You'll forgive me if I'm not used to billionaires showing up with handwritten notes." Sophia didn't answer right away. Instead, she let her eyes wander the room again, the frayed books on the shelf, the cracked plant pot that had clearly been glued back together. There was something beautiful in the imperfections, something earned. "Is there anything I can do?" she asked finally. "Not to repay you, I know that's not the point, but something that matters. To you." Daniel's jaw flexed. Not in frustration, in the kind of deliberation that comes from years of trying not to owe anyone anything. "You want to do something," he asked. "Fix the leak in the pediatric wing of your hospital. Last time I was there, before the night I gave blood, I noticed mold on the ceiling. That can't be good for kids with breathing issues." Sophia blinked. That wasn't what she expected. Not a request for help, not even for him, just for others. "I'll have my facilities team there by morning," she said. He nodded. Then Lila ran back in flashlight in hand, her cheeks flushed. "Can we turn off the lights and test the spaceship?" Daniel smiled, a full, genuine smile that softened the edges of his face. "Let's do it." He reached for the switch and the room dimmed. Lila crawled under the table and clicked the flashlight on casting shadows that danced on the wall like planets orbiting invisible stars. Sophia watched transfixed. Not by the spaceship, but by the sight of a man, weary, modest, and kind, giving his daughter a moment that felt like magic. No headlines, no wealth, just love so quietly powerful it hurt to witness. After 20 more minutes of cardboard launches and whispered giggles, Rachel gently reminded Sophia of the time. Outside the apartment, the night had drawn in again, but the air had changed. Lighter somehow, as if something unspoken had settled between them. Daniel walked them to the door. "Thank you for letting us in," Sophia said. "Thank you for coming," he replied. She hesitated. "I don't know where this goes from here, but I hope this isn't the last time we talk." He looked at her not with judgment or suspicion, but with something deeper. "I don't either," he said quietly. In the hallway, Rachel whispered as they made their way to the elevator. "You're not used to being seen like this, are you?" "No," Sophia murmured. "But tonight I felt more human than I have in years." Rachel glanced back toward the apartment. And him. Sophia didn't answer right away. Then she smiled almost wistfully. "He's the only person I've met who saved my life, and then offered me peace instead of power." The elevator doors opened. Sophia stepped in, her heart heavier and lighter at once. For the first time in years, she wasn't sure what came next, and she didn't mind. Sometimes when life hits pause, something better begins to right itself. The next morning, the sun hung low behind a soft haze and Daniel stood beneath the creaking porch of a job site on the east side. He had just finished patching a faulty water heater when his phone buzzed with a text from a number he didn't recognize. The pediatric ceiling was replaced this morning. No more leaks. Thank you. SL. He stared at the screen longer than he meant to. No emojis, no business signature, just a direct message with a purpose and a strange kind of warmth. He could picture her typing it, Sophia Langford, the woman who lived in a world of glass walls and boardroom silence, pressing send with the same care he'd used to fasten a child's toy rocket the night before. He slid the phone into his pocket and got back to work, but the weight in his chest had shifted. That evening, the knock on the door came at twilight just as Lila was setting the table with plastic plates and too many napkins. Daniel opened the door to find Sophia standing there again alone, this time in jeans and a cream sweater, her hair tucked casually behind one ear. "I brought dinner," she said, holding up a brown paper bag with the logo of a family-run Italian place across town. "And it's not catered." Daniel raised an eyebrow but stepped aside with a faint smile. "You planning on doing this often?" "I haven't decided," she replied, brushing past him. "But I figure if someone saves your life, the least you can do is feed them." Lila squealed when she saw the bag. "Is that spaghetti and meatballs?" Sophia confirmed. "And tiramisu, if your dad says yes." "He says yes," Lila called over her shoulder before Daniel could respond. Dinner unfolded easily, almost suspiciously so. The conversation stayed light food, Lila's astronaut phase, and the merits of glitter glue. But once Lila fell asleep on the couch with a blanket over her legs and tomato sauce still faintly on her chin, the quiet between Daniel and Sophia turned into something heavier. They stood in the tiny kitchen, 2 mugs of tea steaming between them. "You didn't have to come," Daniel said finally. "Not again." "I know." He glanced at her. "You're not someone used to following up on things, are you?" Sophia looked down, then met his eyes with something unguarded. "I used to think everything in life could be solved with a system. Strategy, timing, planning. But this, what happened between us, doesn't fit into anything I know how to control." Daniel took a sip of his tea. "That's probably a good sign." She gave a small laugh, short but real. "May I ask something?" she said softly. He nodded. "Your wife. What happened?" Daniel's hands tightened slightly on the ceramic mug. 4 years ago. Car crash. She was rushed into emergency surgery. She had O-negative blood. The hospital didn't have enough. They called the donor network, but no one made it in time. Sophia's breath caught. "That's when I signed up," he continued. "To be a donor. I figured if someone else got a chance to keep the person they loved, maybe that would make the rest of it bearable." He looked at her, then not with pain but with honesty. "You were the first call I ever answered." Sophia swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry. You didn't cause it." "No," she said. "But I think I understand the guilt that comes from surviving when someone else didn't." Daniel leaned back against the counter. How Sophia hesitated. "My mother died in a free clinic when I was 13. No insurance. The staff did what they could, but there weren't enough supplies. Or doctors. Or time. I sat there watching her slip away because the system didn't think she was worth saving." Daniel's face softened. "That's why I started Langford Health Trust," she continued. "I told myself I'd fix the system. Build something so big no one like my mother would ever be turned away again." "You did," Daniel said. "You built a whole network." "I did," she agreed, "but somewhere along the way I stopped seeing the people inside it. I measured impact by charts, graphs, headlines, not lives." She looked over at Lila, sleeping peacefully on the couch. "You and your daughter reminded me what it's really about." Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence between them spoke volumes, 2 people who had loved lost and tried to make sense of the pieces in different ways. 2 scars that didn't match and yet somehow aligned. Sophia rose from the kitchen stool and moved to the door. "I should let you rest," she said, "but thank you. For the tea and the stories, and for not asking me to leave the first time." Daniel followed her hands in his pockets. As she stepped out onto the small landing, she paused, then turned. "Would it be all right if I invited you both to a fundraiser next week? It's low-key. Outdoors, for the new pediatric program. I'd like people to meet the reason it exists." Daniel tilted his head. "You mean you want to put me in a tie and make me shake hands?" Sophia laughed. "No tie required. Just be you." He studied her, the way her voice softened when she spoke about children now, the way her eyes no longer darted to her phone every few seconds. "I'll think about it," he said. "That's all I ask." As she descended the stairs and disappeared into the dimming evening, Daniel stood for a moment longer, listening to the hush of the street, the quiet rhythm of a life that was no longer just survival. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a man patching holes in everyone else's world. He felt like someone, beginning to rebuild his own. The fundraiser took place on a crisp Saturday afternoon at Brookstone Gardens, a quiet, manicured corner of the city with winding stone paths and old oak trees casting dappled light over the grass. The Langford Foundation had rented a section of the park and filled it with folding chairs, paper lanterns, and white tents serving lemonade and finger food. Daniel stood at the edge of it, all hands tucked deep into his pockets, wearing the cleanest shirt he owned. No tie, no suit, just the man he was. He hadn't wanted to come. Even after Sophia's invitation, he'd wrestled with the idea. Fundraisers weren't for people like him, they were for polished guests, people who said philanthropy and meant legacy. He was a single dad with calloused hands and unpaid bills. But Lila had begged him eyes wide with hope. "You said she's nice," she'd whispered, "and you like helping kids. Maybe this time someone helps you too." That had stopped him cold. So here he was, feeling like a misplaced puzzle piece, scanning the crowd for Sophia. She found him first. Wearing a dark blue dress that caught the breeze just enough to make her look softer than usual, Sophia walked toward him with a small smile. Not the public one, but the private kind. The one she'd only shared in his kitchen over tea. "I'm glad you came," she said. Daniel gave her a nod. "This your idea of low-key?" She laughed lightly. "I scaled it down, believe it or not." Lila was already skipping off toward the arts and crafts booth where volunteers helped children paint wooden hearts. Daniel watched her go with mild nerves, letting her wander at an event this upscale felt like letting a kite drift too far. "She's safe," Sophia assured him. "There are security teams in place, no press. I made sure of it." He glanced at her. "You planned all that?" For me, Sophia hesitated. For both of us. As the event carried on, Daniel noticed the subtle change in her. Sophia wasn't hosting the way he imagined CEOs did. She wasn't the center of attention. She moved through the crowd like someone who had nothing to prove, listening, thanking, connecting. And yet, he saw how others looked at her with awe, admiration, sometimes deference. He didn't belong in that circle, and he knew it. He could feel the whispers when people asked her who he was. He stayed on the outskirts, speaking only when spoken to, keeping his smile polite and brief. At one point, a man in a Navy sport coat approached. "You're the donor, aren't you?" he asked, voice loud and public. Daniel stiffened. "I didn't." "Don't be modest," the man continued. "It's a hell of a story. You should speak during the program. 5 minutes. Just tell people what you did." Daniel's expression cooled. "No, thank you." The man blinked, clearly not used to being turned down. "But think of the impact." "I didn't do it for impact," Daniel said flatly. "I did it because someone needed help." Sophia arrived beside him just in time, eyes narrowing at the man's pushiness. He said no. The man backed off with a sheepish smile and a handshake no one returned. Later, after the small speeches had ended and the crowd had thinned, Daniel sat on a bench beneath an oak tree watching Lila show off her heart-shaped painting to a group of younger kids. Sophia approached and sat beside him, her heels in one hand, her bare feet pressing into the grass. "Do you always take your shoes off at black tie events?" Daniel asked, amused. "Only the ones that matter," she replied. Then, quieter, "Are you okay?" Daniel stared straight ahead. "People like that. They don't see me. I'm not part of the picture. I'm a story for them to tell, not a person to know." Sophia looked at him carefully. "You're not wrong, but you're also not invisible." He exhaled slowly. "I've spent years trying to stay small, fix things, keep Lila safe. I don't have time to care about who's impressed." "You shouldn't have to," she said. "You've done enough." Daniel looked at her, studying the scar still faintly visible along her collarbone. "You know he said I didn't expect you to change." Sophia tilted her head. "Did I? I think so," he said. "Before you wore armor. Now, you're here, in the dirt, barefoot." She laughed. "Don't tell the board." He smiled, and for a moment they just sat in silence, two people who had collided in the most unexpected way, both finding pieces of themselves they hadn't realized were missing. As the sun dipped lower, casting golden light across the garden, Lila came running toward them. "Look," she cried, holding out her heart painting. "This one's for you, Miss Sophia." Sophia blinked. "For me? Yep. Daddy said your heart needed fixing too. I wanted to help." Sophia took the little wooden heart painted bright red with glitter stars and a scribbled smile in the center. She swallowed against the lump in her throat. "Thank you, Lila," she said, her voice catching. The girl beamed and skipped off again. Daniel watched her go, then turned to Sophia. "She sees people better than I do." "She sees truth," Sophia said, "and love. No filters." They sat together until the garden lights blinked on, casting soft glows among the trees. "I don't know what this is," Sophia whispered. "You and me. Or what it's becoming." Daniel didn't speak right away. Then he said, "Neither do I. But for the first time in a long time, I'm not afraid to find out." And in that moment, under fading sun and rising stars, neither of them was. The week after the fundraiser passed like a dream Daniel hadn't dared to imagine. For the first time in years, his routine early shifts, lunchbox notes for Lila's second-hand parts, and a fading toolbox felt lighter, almost touched by something unspoken, something new. Sophia texted occasionally. Simple things. A photo of a new mural going up in the pediatric wing. A quote she liked from a book on kindness. A blurry snapshot of a heart-shaped sticker someone had put on her office door. He never expected her to be casual, but she surprised him every time. And then on Friday, something shifted. The message came just after noon. "Are you free tonight?" Daniel hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. "Depends." "Why?" "Because I'm not. And I don't want to be alone." When he arrived at her townhouse that evening, she was already waiting at the door, barefoot hair down, a soft gray sweater clinging to her shoulders like armor undone. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said. "I wasn't either," he admitted. "But then, you said something most people never do." "What's that?" "That you needed someone." She opened the door without another word, and he followed her into a space that was equal parts minimalist and lonely. Tall windows, sculptures instead of photos. Beauty without fingerprints. There was no staff, no catered spread. Just a bottle of wine and 2 mugs of tea on the kitchen island. No pretense, no performance. Just Sophia and whatever she was carrying. They sat on the balcony overlooking the twinkling skyline. "I had a board meeting today," she said finally. "They want to expand again. 2 more hospitals in the next 3 years. That's good, isn't it?" "Objectively, yes," she said. "But I kept thinking about that boy I nearly hit. And the ceiling leak in the pediatric unit. And your daughter's smile." She paused, eyes fixed on some far-off thought. "When did I stop seeing people, Daniel?" He didn't answer immediately. "Maybe when you had to start saving everyone at once." She turned her face toward him, and for the first time he saw the exhaustion beneath the polish. Not just physical soul-deep weariness, the kind that accumulates over years of holding the world upright. "I've always told myself that strength is measured by what you carry," she whispered. "But lately I've wondered if it's also about knowing when to stop lifting alone." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "Even the strongest beams need bracing." She smiled faintly. "You always talk like you're fixing something." "Because I usually am." Sophia looked down at her hands. "I used to think people would only respect me if I never let them see the cracks." "And what do you think now?" She met his gaze slower this time. "Now I think maybe the cracks are where the light gets in." Daniel let that sit for a while. The wind rustled the ivy growing along the railing. "I didn't expect you to be like this," he said softly. "Like what soft? Real? Human?" Sophia laughed gently, a little broken sound. "Neither did I." They moved inside as the air grew cool, and she made him scrambled eggs and toast, oddly proud of her lack of culinary flair. "You sure you're not trying to impress me with powdered garlic?" he teased, taking a bite. "I'm playing to my strengths," she replied, which apparently include setting off the smoke alarm. They laughed together genuinely freely, and it felt like something sacred was being exchanged without words. Like two people who had known too much loss were slowly remembering what it meant to be seen. And still wanted. Later, Sophia sat on the edge of her couch, her knees drawn up slightly, a photo frame in her hands. Daniel had noticed it earlier, but said nothing. Now she passed it to him. It was a picture of a younger Sophia, maybe 18, sitting on a hospital cot, arm wrapped around a tired-looking woman with brilliant eyes. "My mother," she said. "The only person who ever made me believe I was enough just by existing." Daniel studied the photo. "She looks proud." She was, even when we had nothing, especially then. Sophia paused, then whispered, "Some days I think she wouldn't recognize me now. Not the version I became." Daniel placed the frame gently on the coffee table. "I think she'd say her daughter built a world where no one else would be left behind the way she was." Sophia swallowed hard. "I just wish it didn't cost me so much of me." He looked at her. "Then maybe it's time you got her back." Silence fell again, but it was comfortable. Not empty, full of all the things that didn't need to be said. When Daniel stood to leave, Sophia walked him to the door, arms crossed but eyes open. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet. "For showing up. For not asking for more than I can give. I wasn't expecting anything. That's the part that undoes me most." Daniel lingered in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame. He looked at her, at this woman who had the power to build hospitals and still chose to call him when she felt small. "I'll come when you call," he said simply, "even if all you need is quiet." Sophia didn't answer. Instead, she stepped forward and rested her forehead against his chest just for a second. Then she let go, stepped back, and closed the door with a soft smile. And Daniel walked away with the feeling that something fragile had been entrusted to him, not a person to fix, but a soul learning how to breathe again. And somehow, it felt like he was learning too. The following days unfolded with a quiet rhythm like waves that reached further with each return. Daniel found himself checking his phone more often, not out of restlessness, but anticipation. Sophia's messages came not in bursts, but in calm, measured moments. A photo of a sunrise from her office, a thought about a book she was rereading, a question about what Lila's favorite ice cream flavor was. It was mint chocolate chip, emphatically so. They weren't flirting. Not yet. But something gentle and meaningful pulsed beneath their every word. And then came the invitation. A foundation dinner. Nothing flashy, just donors and partners of the Langford Health Trust. It was Sophia's idea to invite Daniel and Lila, and when he hesitated, she assured him it was informal. "It's just a dinner," she said over the phone. Nothing more. But when he arrived that evening with Lila in hand and a button-down shirt he hadn't worn in years, he knew better. The room buzzed with polite conversation and clinking glassware. Crisp white linens covered tables beneath warm chandeliers, and everywhere Daniel turned there were suits and dresses, handshakes, and rehearsed laughter. He stood awkwardly at the entrance, adjusting the collar that didn't quite sit right. Lila clung to his side, wide-eyed. "This isn't like the garden party," she whispered. "No," he murmured, scanning the room. "It's not." And then he saw her. Sophia, across the room, wearing an emerald green dress that caught the light like falling leaves. Her hair was pinned loosely, and she was smiling politely as she spoke to two men in tuxedos. But the second her eyes met his, something shifted. She excused herself mid-sentence and walked straight to them. "You made it," she said, voice softer now, as if speaking only to them. Daniel cleared his throat. "We almost didn't." "I'm glad you did." She turned to Lila. "I saved some of those raspberry tarts you liked. They're in the back." Lila beamed and ran off toward the dessert table like it was a treasure hunt. Sophia turned back to Daniel. "You okay?" He hesitated. "This isn't my world." Her expression sobered. "Maybe it shouldn't be mine either." Before he could ask what she meant, someone interrupted them. A man in his late 60s, tall and sharp in a tailored gray suit. Daniel recognized him. His photo had been in one of Sophia's press interviews. "Ah, Sophia," the man said. "And this must be your guest." Daniel extended a hand. "Daniel Hart." "Robert Hensley," the man replied, shaking it. "Board member, you're the donor, correct? The Everyman Miracle Story." Daniel's smile faded slightly. "I'm not sure I'd put it that way." Hensley laughed like it was a compliment. "Well, you've certainly made waves. The media loves a story like yours, blue-collar hero, anonymous generosity, CEO redemption arc. It practically writes itself." Sophia shifted beside him. "Robert, that's not why I invited him." "Of course not," Hensley said smoothly. "But let's not pretend it doesn't help. This foundation survives on stories. And this one, it sells hope." Daniel's stomach turned. Not out of anger, out of the cold clarity of being reduced again. He glanced at Sophia, but she was already stepping forward. "That's enough, Robert." Hensley arched a brow. "It's just business." "No," she said, her voice steady, cool. "It's people, and you just forgot that." Hensley gave a tight nod and walked away, leaving a silence that buzzed louder than the crowd. Daniel turned to her, voice low. "Is that how they all see me?" "A headline?" "No," she said, "but some do. And I'm sorry for that." He exhaled slowly. "I told you I didn't want to be a symbol." "You're not," she said. "You're a compass. You point me back to what matters." He looked down, hands tightening. "That man Hensley, he's part of your board?" "Yes. And he decides where your money goes." "He influences it," she admitted. "But he doesn't own it." Daniel nodded, jaw set. "Then maybe he needs reminding of that." Sophia smiled faintly, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "He's not the only one." They stepped out to the terrace after dinner. The city lights shimmered in the distance, but the air was clearer here, away from speeches and checkbooks. Daniel leaned against the railing, watching the moonlight fall on the water below. "When I gave that blood," he said, voice quiet, "I didn't know who you were. I didn't care. I just didn't want a daughter to lose her mother. That's it." "I know." "But tonight," he continued, "I felt like a prop, like I was invited to make people feel good about themselves." Sophia didn't flinch. "And I promised myself I would never let that happen." "You didn't," he said, "but I needed to say it out loud." She stepped closer until their shoulders brushed. "I'm still learning how to be two people at once," she admitted. "The woman they expect, and the woman I'm becoming because of you." Daniel turned to her. "You don't have to be two people." Sophia held his gaze. "Maybe not, but I want to be one person you can trust." He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for her hand, not dramatically, not performatively, just a quiet offering. She took it without hesitation. Later that night, as Daniel drove Lila home, she looked up from the back seat. "Miss Sophia looked sad," she said. Daniel glanced in the rearview mirror. She's figuring things out. Like you used to." He smiled softly. "Yeah, exactly like that." And somewhere beneath the quiet hum of tires on asphalt, something deeper stirred. Not a story, not a headline, but a shared truth between two lives moving slowly, bravely toward something real. The repair job wasn't supposed to take long, just a broken heating system in a children's shelter downtown. But Daniel never could walk away from something half-fixed. Not when the vents hissed with rust and the boiler vibrated like a worn-out heart. He worked in silence, tools clinking against metal, the echoes bouncing off chipped tile and posters drawn by small hands. A boy, no older than Lila, peeked into the hallway barefoot holding a crumpled juice box. "You fixing it so we don't freeze?" the boy asked. Daniel nodded, sweat sliding down his temple. "That's the plan." "Thanks, the boy," mumbled, disappearing before Daniel could respond. It was in those quiet moments deep in the bones of buildings no one remembered that Daniel felt most like himself. No suits, no cameras, just purpose. He was tightening a final valve when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned, expecting the shelter director, but stopped short when he saw Rachel. Sophia's Rachel. She looked out of place among the peeling walls and linoleum floors, tailored coat expression, tight heels clicking against grime. She held a white envelope in one hand, her grip too stiff. "She didn't want me to come," Rachel said, "but I had to." Daniel stood wiping his hands on a rag. "Is Sophia okay?" "She's not hurt," Rachel said quickly, "but she's shaken, and I think you deserve to know why." She handed him the envelope. Daniel opened it slowly. Inside were 2 printed pages. A scanned article years old. Headline in bold, Langford Health Partnership. Ends agreement with non-profit hospital network amid funding dispute. His eyes skimmed the body of the text. Legal jargon, corporate decisions, cutbacks, realignment. But one sentence stopped him cold. The funding dispute led to a temporary suspension of critical services, including access to rare blood types at multiple affiliated hospitals. Daniel's hands stilled. He remembered the night 4 years ago, the frantic call, the nurse's apology. "We're still waiting on a donor." The supply was cut last month, and now he knew why. Rachel's voice broke the silence. "One of the hospitals affected was the one your wife was admitted to. Sophia didn't know. Not until yesterday." Daniel said nothing. He just stared at the page, the weight of it pressing into his chest like a vice. "She didn't make the call herself," Rachel continued. "It was her board, but she signed off on it. She didn't realize the human cost until it became her own." Daniel sat heavily on an overturned milk crate, elbows on his knees, paper limp in his hands. "She built all this to save people," he murmured. "And she helped create the chain that got my wife killed." Rachel sat beside him more carefully. "She's not the same woman she was back then. You've seen that." "I have," Daniel admitted. "But it doesn't undo it." "No," Rachel said softly. "It doesn't. But maybe it explains the way she's been looking at you like someone who's been handed grace and doesn't know what to do with it." Daniel didn't respond. He just stared at the boiler humming low like a second heart in the building's belly. That night, Sophia stood in the rain. She was outside, the shelter hood pulled over her hair, her hands buried in her coat pockets. When Daniel stepped out, he paused at the sight of her, unsure if anger or sadness would rise first. "I didn't want to send her," she said before he could speak, "but I knew you needed the truth, and I owed it." Daniel looked at her, the same woman he'd come to trust now, cast in a different light, not villainous but flawed in a way that cut deeper. "She died, waiting on blood," he said, "because of a funding decision. Yours." Sophia's throat worked to form words. "I didn't know. I swear to you, Daniel, I didn't know the names, the impact. I was taught to move numbers, not hearts. And now," she said quietly, "I see her face every time I sign anything. I see your daughter. I see you." She took a step forward, rain collecting in the corners of her eyes like tears she didn't want to let fall. "I can't undo it," she whispered. "But if you walk away right now, I'll understand, and I won't stop you." Daniel stared at her soaked, trembling, honest. He could have turned away, could have left her in that moment just as he had been left 4 years ago. But he didn't, because in her eyes he didn't see a woman running from guilt, he saw someone who had stopped running entirely. "I'm not walking away," he said, "but don't ask me to forget." "I'm not," she said. "I'm asking you to believe that people can change." He nodded, slowly. "I do. Because I did." They stood there, two people forged in loss, no longer separated by what they hadn't known, but united in what they finally understood. Redemption isn't a headline. It's not a board decision. It's showing up in the rain and saying, "I'm still here even when you have every reason not to be." It's choosing to stay. The auditorium wasn't grand. No chandeliers or velvet curtains, just rows of folding chairs lined with purpose. A modest stage stood under soft lighting backed by a navy banner with simple white lettering, the type match one life, countless chances. Sophia stood backstage, her fingers tracing the outline of the index cards in her hand. She didn't need them. She'd rehearsed every word. But tonight, the speech wasn't about polish or perfection. It was about truth, and she had never been more afraid to tell it. Rachel peeked in from the side curtain. 5 minutes. Sophia nodded, but her eyes were searching the crowd through the curtain slit. Dozens of donors had gathered, some in heels, others in worn jeans. Medical staff, volunteers, patients. Faces she had known from photos, and faces she now knew from life. But one face hadn't arrived yet. Meanwhile, across the city, Daniel was helping Lila into her best dress, a lavender cotton thing with a sewn-in sash she insisted on tying herself. He checked his watch again. The event had already started. "Are we late?" she asked, glancing up at him. "Not yet," he said with a half-smile. "But we will be if I don't get this shoe tied." Lila giggled and bounced on one foot. "Do you think she's nervous? I think she's terrified," Daniel replied, pulling the knot tight. "But I also think she's braver than anyone I've ever met." Lila tilted her head. "Even braver than you." He didn't answer, just helped her up and whispered, "Let's go find our seats." Backstage. Sophia stared at her reflection in a makeshift mirror. She looked composed, professional, but her heart thundered like war drums. Because this wasn't about numbers tonight. Not expansion. Not quarterly growth. It was about a man in a flannel shirt with a soft-spoken voice and a daughter who painted hearts with glitter. And it was about facing her past and choosing what kind of future she would lead. When her name was called, she stepped out to polite applause. But as she reached the podium and looked out into the lights, something in her breath caught. Because Daniel and Lila had just walked through the back doors, slipping in quietly, and took a seat near the last row. He gave her a small nod. And that was all she needed. "Good evening," Sophia began. Her voice steadied against the hush. "I could stand here and tell you how many hospitals we've funded, how many lives we've saved, and those numbers matter, but not as much as the reason we're here." She paused. Her hand moved almost unconsciously to the faint scar beneath her collarbone. "Months ago, I almost died. An accident, massive internal injuries, no matching blood in storage, and just when my team thought there was no hope, a man walked into the hospital. No badge, no question. He just offered what he had, his blood." There were murmurs in the audience now, heads turning. "He didn't know who I was. He didn't care, and he saved me not just physically. He reminded me what leadership is supposed to look like." Sophia's eyes swept the crowd and found Daniel again. He didn't flinch, but his grip on Lila's shoulder tightened slightly. "I built this organization to prevent the loss I experienced as a child. But in building systems, I forgot people. I forgot the names, the costs. I forgot the one thing my mother taught me, that healing isn't just medicine. It's kindness. It's showing up." Her voice cracked but held. "And so I want to introduce the new initiative we've created in partnership with hospitals across the state. It's called the Type Match, a real-time donor network built to connect urgent cases with volunteers, not based on status or payment, but on the simple act of saying, 'Yes, I'm here. Use me.'" Applause began slowly, then built. But Sophia held up her hand. "One more thing," she said. She turned slightly toward the last row. "I didn't ask his permission to do this, but tonight I'd like to recognize the first anonymous match in our program, the man who unknowingly inspired it all." She held out her hand. Daniel Hart. Daniel froze. All eyes turned. Lila gave him a wide-eyed look. "She said your name?" He stood, slowly, awkwardly, the way people stand when they've spent their whole lives in the back of rooms. The crowd parted as he walked forward. Not with applause now, but with respect. With silence. Sophia stepped down from the stage to meet him halfway, her hand still outstretched. And when he reached her, she didn't take his hand. She hugged him. It wasn't a PR gesture. It wasn't calculated. It was gratitude full and raw for the life she got to keep and for the one he helped her find again. When they pulled apart, Sophia whispered just for him, "Thank you for not walking away." He looked at her, really looked, and said, "Thank you for walking toward something better." That night, as people filtered out of the auditorium with pamphlets and ideas and inspiration in their pockets, Sophia and Daniel stood beneath the marquee lights with Lila between them, each holding one of her hands. "She told the whole world about you." Lila grinned up at her dad. Daniel chuckled. "Guess the secret's out." Sophia turned to him. "So, was it too much?" He shook his head. It was the truth. And in that moment, under soft lights and soft laughter, the truth was finally enough. The fall air held a gentle chill, the kind that signaled change without urgency, like the world was taking a breath before something new. Daniel stood outside his apartment building, waiting for the moving truck hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket. Lila sat cross-legged on the front step, clutching her stuffed astronaut with one arm and a peanut butter sandwich in the other. "You think our new place will have a creaky stair like this one?" she asked, kicking gently at the loose board. "Probably not," Daniel said, smiling. "But I'm sure we can find something else to trip over." She grinned. "Can I paint my room blue? Like the galaxy?" "We'll talk about it," he said, which after many such requests Lila knew meant yes. When Sophia pulled up in a dark hybrid SUV, Daniel wasn't surprised. She had a way of knowing when to show up, not because she had to, but because she chose to. She stepped out wearing a coat too thin for the weather, but her cheeks were flushed and her eyes bright, the kind of bright that didn't come from adrenaline or status, but from rest, from clarity. "I brought coffee," she said, holding out 2 cups, "and hot chocolate for the future astrophysicist." Lila took hers with the reverence of a sacred object. "You remembered the marshmallows?" "I remember everything that matters," Sophia replied. Daniel chuckled, taking the coffee. "Careful. You're starting to sound like a real human." "I'm in recovery," she said. "One heartbeat at a time." The move was small, just a few boxes, a worn couch, and a toolbox Daniel refused to part with. The new place was a rented duplex on the edge of the city near a park and within walking distance of a good school. It wasn't flashy, but it had light, windows that faced east, walls that echoed with potential. As the last box was set down in the living room, Daniel stood beside Sophia, hands on his hips. "You realize," he said, "this is the first place I've picked not out of necessity, but out of hope." She looked around. "It suits you." He turned to her, expression softening. "And you?" Sophia raised an eyebrow. "I'm not moving in. Not yet." "No," Daniel said. "But you're part of this." She didn't answer. Instead, she crossed the room, opened the sliding door to the backyard, and stepped out onto the small porch. Daniel followed her. They stood in the fading gold of late afternoon, watching Lila run through patches of sunlight, chasing leaves with a stick like it was a magic wand. "I've been thinking," Sophia said quietly, "about all the times I thought love had to look a certain way, structured, earned, proven. And now, she said, I think love looks like the things we do without asking for anything back. Like blood given in the dark. Like bedtime stories after long days. Like staying even when you could leave." Daniel nodded. "Sounds a lot like grace." She looked at him, then really looked, and he saw the woman she had become. Still powerful, still driven, but rooted now. Softened not because she'd lost her edge, but because she'd finally learned that strength didn't mean solitude. "I don't know where this is going," she whispered. Daniel smiled. "That's the best part." Later, after the boxes were opened and pizza was eaten off paper plates, Lila curled up on the new couch with a blanket and a book, her eyelids growing heavy. Sophia sat beside her, brushing a hand over her hair. "She trusts you," Daniel said from across the room. "She makes it easy." "Not everyone sees her," he said. "Not really, but you do." Sophia looked over at him. "And you see me not as the name on a building, but as the woman who broke then healed." He stepped closer, kneeling beside the couch, one hand brushing hers. "You didn't just heal. You changed. You chose to. And you let me," she whispered. Daniel leaned forward, gently pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "Not by chance," he said. In the months that followed, the type match grew beyond expectation, not because of marketing, but because of stories. Nurses told them. Families passed them down. Donors became heroes not in headlines, but in whispers. And at the heart of it all were Daniel and Sophia, not perfect, not performative, just present. They attended community nights, helped paint murals at the children's wing, took Lila to science museums on weekends. And on the anniversary of the day Daniel gave his blood, they returned to Westview Medical, where Sophia placed a single lily by the nurse's station and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up." One evening, as they stood under the porch light of Daniel's home, no longer new, now broken in and loved, Sophia took his hand. "You think people like us," she asked, "get to keep this?" He pulled her gently into his arms. "No," he said, "we get to build it." And they did. Not perfectly, not easily, but with grace, with presence, and with the kind of love that doesn't shout, it shows up, again and again, not by chance, but by choice, always by choice. Where in the world are you watching from? We'd love to know. Drop your city or country in the comments below and let us know which part of the story touched your heart the most. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of our upcoming heartwarming stories. Thank you so much for watching. We're truly grateful to have you here. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and keep believing in the quiet miracles of life.